Here is where this is all about to get good, in my very biased opinion. At this point, you may be overwhelmed by all the information and be unsure of exactly where to start. What to do? Does this need to be this challenging, complicated process in getting to conscious interaction? How do I do this? Where do I start? Do I really have the time and energy for this? And the truth is, it doesn't need to be incredibly difficult. We can take it one interaction and one day at a time, whatever feels more helpful or simple to you. In the next 5 minutes, I'll show you exactly how to get started today. So we'll break down this meltdown method process and how thousands of families and bits of this process have supported along the way. In the last video, I showed you why power and control and behavior and punishments may just not be the best way to achieve connected relationships with kids. You decide. And I introduce you to the meltdown method and how it may be a more helpful scenario and process for everyone involved. If you haven't watched that first video, make sure you go do that now. I talked about a lot of important things and really setting the foundation of this whole process. If you really want to become empowered through meltdowns and outside of them, go back and check it out. You don't want to miss it. So buckle up. The first step of this process is to sort through our cultural, societal, or familial brainwashing. You may think you are not brainwashed. However, every single perspective and experience has shaped us into who we are today. Step one is the judgment generator. You may be wondering, what in the world are judgments? What does this have to do with meltdowns? Why am I starting here? It's really about this process of reparenting, which is honing in on our interactions and our reactions and being there for our own emotions in a compassionate way so we can create sustainable, lasting change. It's really about exploring all of the ways that judgments in the present are often rooted in childhood or things that we've experienced throughout life. For example, things that we heard are internalized as false beliefs now. So if we heard something like, kids should be quiet, we internalize that we are too much, or it is not good to be loud or messy or to take up space. If we heard, big kids don't cry, we may have internalized falsely that crying is vulnerability and vulnerability is bad. So keep that away, send that to the room next door, don't get anywhere near us with that vulnerable stuff. I'll give you something to cry about, or you're okay, or if you do that, you'll get spanked. All of this is helping us internalize this false belief that we are too much and our emotions are not valid. Our experiences aren't real. That parents or caregivers or teachers or whoever it is in that power figure role knows better, and we're fine, there's nothing to worry about. So this minimizing or resisting or defending or invalidating begins to shape our beliefs about who we are and what the world around us is. Before we learn this, we end up judging that mom that broke down in the meeting because we think it's not professional enough. Or we start to judge the parent using certain car seats, or that professional that isn't doing something just the right way because it is perceived as bad in our judgment-based world. Maybe we cringe at that needy person that's always calling or texting, or we judge this child that is upset because we think it has something to do with us, and we think it's a reflection of our worth because it's good to be smiley and happy and joyful. This child isn't, so somebody needs to be blamed here. Somebody needs to take that blame. We judge ourselves for being different or doing things differently, or when a child is angry because, again, we think we should have done something differently, that it's our fault. Maybe we judge that parent for not punishing their child because in our home, punishment was how lessons were taught. And kids that aren't punished are spoiled brats. So kids that aren't totally, criticized or shamed for things become spoiled. So we don't want that to happen. Our mission in step one is to reparent the child within all of us and wait for these uncomfortable emotions to come up at the core, to be felt, and notice all of the judgments that arise within them and how these judgments trigger that stress within us again and again. So what do we do? How do we really start this? Get messy with the judgments. Write them down. Tell them to a friend who won't judge you for thinking them or saying them, because they're such an inherent part of being human. We have these thoughts that aren't good or nice or helpful. They just are. So when we get them out, we share them with a trusted friend, we start to move through the judgment. And ring a mental bell. So almost anytime you hear yourself saying a judgment, which a judgment is anything that 1,000 people in the same room or 1,000 people in a room wouldn't say was true. So if anybody would say it wasn't true, it's likely a judgment. So saying things like, oh, that's so fun to do that, or oh, that's so pretty, or that's bad, don't do that. Those are all judgments rooted in our own experiences and perspectives and ways of being. So judgment generation can truly change your life starting now, today. And it connects ourselves with the shadow side that we disowned a long time ago. So the shadow side or shadow self, or these shadow characteristics, are the parts that we didn't think were good, or the parts that we needed to hide away or not show to the world, or the thoughts that we have that weren't good. So we'll just keep them, in the closet or wherever they need to be. And they subconsciously drive our capacity to connect, and they drive our behavior when they aren't talked about or when they aren't out in the open. So are we judging a child for not being nice enough, for example, when they're actually sharing very healthy needs and asserting their attachment signals? Are we viewing a daughter as bossy when it's actually very authentically glowing leadership skills coming through? Are we judging someone else's child for not sharing when actually at 4, kids aren't made to share? Kids are not developmentally ready to share. It's not even helpful for them to share in a forced way at that time. If it comes up volitionally from their body, awesome. If not, there is lots of time, and that's not the time for that. So at the core, this is checking in with our own humanity before, during, after a meltdown, and seeing these holes in how we are showing up that aren't helpful time and again. An example personally to me is that I used to think I could predict others' emotions. So I used to think that I could know what somebody felt and kind of tweak my interaction in a way that felt helpful. And it isn't saying that empaths don't exist or this isn't a helpful tool. We can absolutely influence one another. However, it's saying that we do this in a judgmental way. So I'll never forget when I got feedback that I may be a judgmental empath. And I remember my defensiveness coming up and this self-righteousness coming up and the no, that isn't right. Here's what I was thinking. So anytime we're defending or really thinking about this resistant way of being, that for me is a communicator that there's something in there that really hit home with me. There may be something in there that's true. So I began to realize that I was using my sensitivity to assume versus explore and get curious. And when we look at kids and their behavior and we assume, we miss so much. We miss the capacity to connect with them as individuals and connect with them as humans. As it turns out, because I spent childhood trying to predict caregivers' emotions, whether it was at school or home or caregiving situations, I'd abandoned my own emotional experience for safety or needs to get met at the time. Yet this is not needed anymore in adulthood. So often we carry these things from childhood and we think they're needed now, but they really aren't useful or helpful in our adult lives. So unfortunately, when we abandon our needs and emotions again and again, it shows up in other ways. So physically, emotionally, spiritually, and it eats at our vitality and our relationships. For me, this meant physical issues and autoimmune challenges. It meant lots of relationship anxiety and relationship strife. It meant that I had ongoing fear and shame, despite the circumstances, to highlight that this emotional abandonment was not working for me. So forgetting about my own emotional experience, not so helpful, turns out. And I started to notice my judgments while working with kids. So an example is needing. I had this child that I was working with that I thought was so needy, and I started to feel this disgust arise. And cognitively, I can now recognize that, what was I thinking? This is a child, of course they're needing. But I had all these judgments about what needing is, and that clinging isn't okay, or clinging's annoying, or they really shouldn't need me that much, and this much need is okay, but if they need me this much, they really crossed the line. So all these rules about it. And I started to realize that it was my own relationship with need, and that I had abandoned so many of my needs to become chronically self-sufficient, and I didn't trust asking for help or getting my needs met in some ways. So I just abandoned that and figured I would do it all myself, and it's very praised and rewarded. So you kind of keep doing these things, especially if societally they're seen as good traits. Good being the big judgment there. So understanding this coping mechanism of self-sufficiency that I had picked up was based on avoidant or disorganized attachment. So based in not trusting others or based in not getting my needs met in some way. And I really needed to grieve that very healthy need that I had abandoned and detached from in order to be who I thought I needed to be. Then I could bring in what I know about development, and that this foundational needing is so critical for attachment. So need is attachment happening. And that physical closeness and togetherness isn't just a character trait, but a genius survival mechanism for kids to develop their brains and their bodies and get their developmental needs met. It's also a genius thing for developing secure relationships that are interdependent down the road. So not necessarily overly dependent, but very give and take in a healthy way. It helped me to connect with my own need and to trust others' support. So instead of judging it, it continues to be a process, of course, but this information has allowed me to be present with kids in an entirely different way. And I've shared this information with thousands of you and thousands of people who have bombarded my DMs with similar messages and judgments and challenges that have come from these judgments throughout life. So by generating these judgments and getting them out into the world, we are committing to practice daily to move through them. We can experience life versus getting swept up into these shoulds or what everybody else is saying or everybody's advice or unsolicited wisdom that they share. Instead of getting swept up into that and staying exhausted and stuck and apathetic and frustrated, we can vacillate between that thinking or intensely feeling. And there's a middle ground that is our authentic self. We aren't spinning our wheels when it comes to relationships with kids, the world, or others. In my upcoming Thriving Through Meltdowns program, I'll be sharing a lot more strategies and methods with you. What exactly is happening in the brain and the body in these moments, and how to guide. Based on where your individual child is in that moment, not their age or any blanket advice, but really, really individually. What can we do to support them? We talk about how to establish a foundation, so meltdowns are fewer and less intense when they do arise, and we may even see them as more of an opportunity versus an entirely something we need to dread. I'll show you exactly what's included in a few days, so make sure you stay on the lookout for that information. If that's something you are interested in, make sure you check the early bird list and sign up there, because that will be released a night before the general audience. If you really want in on this program, make sure you get it before the program launches to the general public. In the next video, I'll show you a simple trick to get started and build empowerment and resilience in both yourself and kids versus default to all these ways that we experienced in life. Punishment, yelling, shaming, criticizing. This sequence is literally the #1 secret that I use to get clients started, and I've shared and seen work again and again with so many families. So stay tuned, because what I'm about to share may just blow your mind, and I'm so excited to share it with you. That being said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next.